All right, everyone. This is the first time we have a new name on the podcast called the KBD Podcast. I wanted people to affiliate KBD Insurance, my business, with the KBD Podcast. KBD Podcast, and we got Mr. Bill Mitchell as a guest. I think it's your fourth time.
Yeah.
I always love these conversations. You know a lot about a lot of things, especially when it comes to markets. And I think right now there's a little bit of, I don't want to say turmoil, but there's a little bit of action going on in the markets right now. And who better to have on the podcast than yourself? So thank you for joining us today on the KBD Podcast. How you been?
Good. Thank you for having me. I always enjoy these as much as you do.
Yeah, it's like you kind of get to talk about a bunch of things, talk about some ideas, talk about the markets. And where do you feel like starting? I guess we could kind of start with, let's just get a general overview sense of the markets. I didn't get to check the markets today. You were mentioning that you were checking the markets a little bit earlier today. How are they doing? They flat, pretty?
Doing well today. So there's some key data points out this week. There was a producer price index this morning, consumer price index tomorrow.
We're talking U.S. or Canada?
The U.S. Okay. And, those are closely followed by the investment community. Looking for some direction as to where we're headed, right? Mm-hmm. Investing is forward-looking. So this is one of the big issues right now. Inflation still is, but was perhaps the most important issue that we've been following, because central banks have been raising rates in accordance with their goal of getting inflation back down to their target of 2%. Now I'm talking about the U.S. Federal Central Bank.
The Federal Reserve,
Yeah. So that's being closely followed. This morning's numbers were pretty much in line with what was expected.
What's the rate?
It was 3, let's call it 3 something.
Jeez.
There was
still in the 3s, huh?
Yeah, there was a difference between, if you take out energy and
shelter?
It might have been shelter. There was a bit of a divergence there. But I think, the street is accepting the fact that the direction is lower, the economy is softening, and that the Fed will start to cut rates likely in September. The conundrum is, investors always climbing the wall of worry, is that they might have waited too late to start to cut rates. Because it takes a while for that to transition into the economy. Mm-hmm. So if they've waited too long, there's a higher likelihood of a recession, or more of a recession than less of a recession based on that. So that's one thing that's forward-looking. So when they cut, the question will be, why are you cutting, right? Is it because the economy is softening too much, or because you're forward-looking and trying to anticipate where, that key balance of 2% growth and 2% inflation, which is their objective.
So I just want to I just want to interrupt you for 1 second there. So for the way you were phrasing what you just said was, they might have raised the rates a little bit too late. They're going to drop the rates a little bit too late, which might bring on a recession. Why is that such a bad thing? And the reason I'm asking this question is, markets go through cycles, and recessions are not, in the short term, yes, it's painful, it's not enjoyable, but they are necessary to have a healthy functioning market. And a lot of people feel, myself included, that the central bank, markets are no longer, it's not, the market is controlled by a central bank now, as opposed to letting the free market just take its course. Kind of like a forest fire. Like a fire, it's not necessarily a bad thing. It kills a lot of the trees, but then they come back healthier. So why do central banks want to keep doing this? Like a recession, the point I'm trying to say is, a recession is not necessarily a bad thing. We need to have recessions every once in a while to reset everything.
Yeah, no, agreed, for sure. I think the role they're trying to, or what they're trying to achieve, is to smooth it out, right? You don't want drastic recessions, and you don't want drastic spikes in growth. So they use monetary policy to try and manage the volatility of a boom bust cycle. So that's their role, right? Their mandate is employment, manage employment and inflation,
and to keep the S&P 500 up.
Well,
I'm kidding. That's the joke.
No, but it's all related, right? It's all related. Definitely, it influences. One influences the other. So one could argue this is great news. The economy is softening. That's what they want to do to get inflation down. They've stated that that's their objective. The thing is, you don't want that pendulum to swing too far. So that's why they're looking for that sweet spot. When do we start cutting, right? Because the consensus was they waited way too long to raise rates. We've spoken about that before, I think, right? They were in denial. Inflation was transitory and that it would adjust following the pandemic. But it didn't work out that way. So they were criticized for missing the point on that. So now the fear is, what's their competence level? Are they going to mess up again on the other side of the pendulum and wait too long?
Are you part of the camp that thinks that they raise rates too late?
Yes, yeah, absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah, if you look at the magnitude of the increases, from roughly half a percentage point to 5.25, 5.5 in a relatively short period of time, that's very aggressive. But they had to do it because inflation was getting out of hand.
Okay, so I'm going to push back a little bit there. I'm going to play devil's advocate.
Yeah.
You're saying, and actually myself, I actually think that they raise rates a little bit too late as well. But for the people that don't think that, so one could argue that the way the Fed raised rates, that nothing really broke. Yes, you had some problems with the regional banks, but I mean, that was squashed, it seems like that was kind of kept under control. And that, if you actually look at the economy now, I mean, the U.S. economy has been the leader in the world right now. So why would you say that I think they raised rates too late and this is the problem that they caused? I mean, if you look at all the data, U.S. has good data with regards to GDP, productivity.
Yeah.
Correct me if I'm wrong.
No, you're right. But nevertheless, inflation got out of hand, right? Because they waited too long.
That's true.
I think that's the argument, is they waited too long and actually created the inflation problem because they waited too long. So now we're back to, are they going to wait too long again on the other side? We don't know. But you're right. In the States, the economy is very strong compared to the rest of the world, compared to Canada. We have different issues here, of course, right?
I think we're a bad example right now.
Well, mortgage rates, just to pick one, right, is it's a different mortgage system in Canada than it is in the U.S. In the U.S., you have a 30-year mortgage. And so the worst thing that can happen to you is you stay put in your home.
Yeah.
You don't move because, it's costly to get a new mortgage. You can't transition your mortgage like you can in Canada. In Canada, we have, call it a 5-year mortgage is the standard. So if you look out to 2025, 2026, when people have to refi and renew, that could be a problem. So this is where rates, I think, the Bank of Canada has been more aggressive in bringing rates down. And I think that's one of the considerations is the housing market, because the Canadian consumer is pressed. There's a lot of debt, larger number of insolvencies, all based on rates.
And so what happens if, I have so many questions going on in my head right now. So, because we're kind of all over the place here, but you know what, that's okay. So here, before I ask the question I was about to ask, and because you can't read my mind, you don't know what I was going to ask. But so we keep saying that there was inflation at the beginning, and well, there was inflation. And then you just said that the opposite could happen. So if they drop rates too late, that we could have, I'm assuming you're alluding to the point that there might be deflation. Is that correct?
That's a possibility, yeah.
Okay. And then, so this is a question that I wrote down here. I've never really understood the actual problem with deflation. So I'd like to hear your opinion on this, because in my eyes, when I hear of deflation, I mean, everyone prices just keep going up and up and up and up, and inflation, regardless of what it is, everything is more expensive in Canada right now. Everything is more expensive in the US. Everything is more expensive everywhere. What is the issue with deflation? What's wrong with prices coming down?
I think it's because it's related to a decrease in economic activity. So you kind of have, fewer jobs, fewer growth, less profitability in companies combined with falling prices. So you're kind of on the opposite side of inflationary when the economy is very strong and prices are going up. So you end up with a weakening economy.
But if the economy's weak and then prices just drop over time, yes, there's why can't there, if the economy is doing well, prices go up or they go down? I mean, anything can happen, but like I still don't understand the argument, like why that's such a bad thing. I mean, if we're going to go through a recession, which is what happens in normal market cycles, and during a recession, prices go down, to me, that would be a good thing. Well, it's like the same thing. You can argue that about currencies. So when currencies start to get hammered, I mean, it's not necessarily, it might be bad for one side of the economy, but it might be really good for one side of the economy. So an example would be Greece. When Greece was getting hammered in Europe, they were still in the euro. But when a currency drops, I mean, maybe tourism might boom because, hey, it's really cheap to go. It's happening to Japan right now. So, hey, the Japanese yen, it's not expensive at all. It's a very weak currency. I'm going to go travel there, which in turn brings up tourism. Like there's pros and cons to both sides. So I guess it's just the point. Everyone's been taught to say that deflation is a bad thing. Myself, I don't necessarily agree with that. And I think it's just because I'm going to get a little bit conspiratorial here. I honestly think that there's no way out of this debt catastrophe that we have. It's not just the US, it's not just Canada, it's the world. I think that it's kind of like a marketing job. It's a sales job that they're doing. Deflation's terrible. We have to inflate because they have to inflate away the debt. They have to keep printing. I don't think they're going to stop printing. They can't stop printing. Anyway, that's my take on why they say deflation is bad because I don't. It's not a valid argument. And the other argument is basically like, well, if there's deflation, it could mean that prices are going to fall further. That never happens. I don't buy it. That's basically what I'm trying to say.
Yeah, it's complex.
It's definitely complex.
One thing always affects the other.
Yes.
Intermarkets, whether it's between nations, between currencies, there's always, factors that influence things across nations and asset classes and economies. Lower prices is good for the consumer. If companies are not doing well and prices are falling, then less people will be employed. So maybe you have more people that are unemployed.
But that's happening anyways.
Yeah.
See what I'm saying?
Well, it's the cycle.
Yeah.
It's the cycle.
But the point I'm just trying to make is that's happening anyways. Like the unemployment rate's going up in Canada. I believe it's going up in the US as well. And prices keep going up. So it's like my argument is just, well, why not just let prices go down? If we're going to have all the unemployment rate, why do prices have to continue going up? It would help the consumer more if they just allowed for prices to go down. That's where I honestly think it's like a big scheme. And I'll get to like my whole theory on why I think, I'll just say it right now. We'll say this and then we'll get back on track. This is my tangent for the day. Yeah. But it's like, I honestly think, it makes logical sense. All the turmoil happening in the West right now, like someone was referring to Montreal as Gotham City. It's Toronto. Like it's very clear stuff is breaking down in the West. You cannot argue with that. I think the downfall of this started after 2008. They didn't let the market take the natural course to break, essentially. They printed a bunch of money. And when you print a bunch of money, it benefits the asset holders. And it's a hidden tax that the middle class doesn't understand or know about. I don't think it's a coincidence that things have gotten worse since 2008. And I think a lot of it has to do with quantitative easing and money printing. Because the gap between the rich and the poor since then has gotten massive.
Yeah. There's definitely an avoidance of pain agenda.
Yes.
Right? Avoidance of economic pain.
Yes.
Is that central banks feel they have a responsibility to make life better for everybody. So therefore they use their monetary policy to adjust rates accordingly to keep, the cycle smooth rather than volatile, in my view. Now, is that the right thing to do?
Who knows?
You can argue yes or no.
Yeah.
I guess it's a good thing that they're looking out for the betterment of society, you could argue. Mm-hmm. But it's the means they use to go about it. Like printing money, like the debt levels are, this is talked about incessantly, is will that bubble burst one day? You just can't keep borrowing and borrowing and borrowing. And then you'll get, modern monetary theorists that will say, well, yeah, you can keep printing and printing and printing. Mm. Where does it end when the music stops?
Nobody knows.
Nobody knows.
Yeah.
Nobody knows. So you can be concerned about this every day, and it might not be a problem for 100 years. We don't know. We don't know how it ends. So it's definitely interesting. It's like trying to, uncomplicate the universe. Like it's really like how do you put this theory to work for you? Like, do you own assets in fear? Are you waiting for the end of the world scenario where that's when you want to invest?
Yeah,
like you're afraid to invest? I mean, investing has proven to be, especially investing in equities has proven to be one of the best places to invest your money over the long term.
I absolutely agree. And this is something, and I just love talking about this. We'll get to the questions. I love this. That's one thing too. And this is for all the real estate people out there in Canada in particular. Number one, it's not a landlord-friendly place. And rule number one of investing in real estate is you should be investing in a region or an area that's landlord-friendly. So that's a whole other debate that we're not going to get into. But if you actually look at all of the headaches that you have to deal with, all of the work you have to do, and then most importantly, your return, you're way better off over a 10-year period investing in equities. It's not even close.
Yeah.
Like you can't even get a positive, most of the time in Canada, you can't even get a positive cap rate on your return for real estate. Like, I don't understand why people would do that. And I think it's kind of like this, I guess in Canada, it's just, what do? You buy real estate. Oh, real estate never goes down. Factor in all the costs. Factor in the taxes you got to pay every year. Factor in the commission you got to pay to the real estate broker. Factor in the insurance. Factor in the fact that you might have a tenant that's a pain in the ass who isn't paying you on time or doesn't pay you at all. Like there's all these things. Or you could invest in equities with Palos Wealth Management, with Bill Mitchell. And just over time, like it's not even close.
Yeah.
It's not even close.
Yeah, there's an argument there. I mean, I don't know the numbers off the top of my head, but when the cost of carrying a real estate investment is pretty high.
Yes.
You've got mortgage, insurance, taxes, like you said, brokerage commissions when you buy or sell. That doesn't apply to owning shares of a company that might be paying you a dividend. There's really, unless you're borrowing money to invest, there's really no cost of carrying that investment.
Yeah.
You've committed your capital, but you're not renovating your shares. You're not painting your shares or really insuring your shares. All those costs of owning real estate, to me, it would impact returns over the long term.
Yes.
But like any other market, right? It depends when did you buy.
Correct.
Right? If you bought a house following the crisis in 2008 in the U.S.,
different
you've
story.
done very well.
Yes, different story. I agree.
Yeah. Also, this misconception that real estate never goes down is simply not true. There's been some serious corrections in the real estate market in Canada over the last 50 years for sure.
Yep.
Like Vancouver, Toronto. Even now, I was reading a report about 2 weeks ago about condos in Toronto are basically a money-losing proposition right now if you've bought a condo in the last 6 months or 12 months, whatever it was. And that boils down to a matter of supply and demand. Can people afford to rent at this level? Do you live in your parents' basement? Do you move somewhere else out into a rural area where it's cheaper? So this belief that real estate just continues to go up is simply not true. I mean, look at 07, 08, the crisis in the States. That was rooted in that misconception that real estate, never goes down.
Yep.
It does.
Yeah.
It does. And if it does, you have to look at it this way, in my view. Homes are piggy banks, basically, a line of credit for a lot of people. So if you own if you bought a home for $500K and it's worth $1 million, you've got some equity in your home that you can
take out a HELOC.
Yeah, exactly. And people are doing that, and they'll do it in times like now when insolvencies are going up. People are borrowing to feed their families. This can't go on forever. So at some point, it's a matter of, will homeowners or real estate owners be, forced to start selling? If you do, then it becomes, a domino effect. It always starts at the lower end of the real estate market. People are forced to sell, but it drags down all levels of housing. So I hope that doesn't happen, but there's a possibility it could.
The risk is there. Yeah. I think we're starting to see it. I mean, it could come from within Canada. It could come from outside of Canada. There's so many things that could happen right now. We're at an inflection point in the economy in the world, the international economy, as well as geopolitics. And it's so interesting to talk about because no one really knows what's going to happen. You can make all the predictions.
Yeah.
I think the Canadian housing market is starting to show cracks, but then again, you have the argument of, okay, well, if we keep this level of immigration up, it's really funny. So the current political party, they're like, we're going to slow down immigration. I saw the numbers for July. It was over 100,000 people. So they haven't slowed down anything.
Yeah.
That's a shocker.
Yeah.
And again, I always say this: nothing against immigration. We do not have we don't have the infrastructure to support them. Everyone knows this now.
Yeah.
It's out in the open.
Yeah.
And we can actually talk about not be called racist anymore.
Yeah.
We do not have the infrastructure to support this. There's no jobs, and yet they keep bringing in all these people. It blows my brain.
Yeah.
I don't understand.
Well, we're a country of immigrants, so that's understood. But there's a smart way to go about it. And if you let in too many people too quickly,
stuff breaks.
Yeah, and I mean, it boggles my mind that there's certain areas of the economy that can't find skilled workers.
Yeah.
Why are we not bringing in people who have skills that would fill those positions?
I don't even think they know I think if you were to ask like an immigration officer, like what's the vetting process to bring these people in, I don't think they have one.
They used to. I was reading about this as well this week, was the merit system we used to have, or a point system for coming into Canada, has changed. I didn't take a deep dive into it, but apparently it's changed from what it was years ago when immigrants into Canada were brought in based on their skill set or their wealth level. Mm-hmm. I believe that's sort of been thrown out the window now.
You know what else is like, and this is the reason. So there's one theory to why we bring in so many immigrants, or why we need to, because the birth rate has dropped. And this is very interesting. I didn't know this. Anytime a society gets wealthy, the birth rate drops. So you don't replace what you're losing. And interestingly enough, the same thing happened in Rome. I didn't know that. Yeah. So the birth rates start to drop when people have abundance and they can do whatever. They have wealth, debauchery, whatever you want to call it. Birth rate drops. So the one side of the argument is, well, who's going to pay for all the pensions? Who's going to pay for all the people that are about to retire? Japan's having the same issue. A lot of countries are having the same issue because they have, and so does Canada, and so does the West. We have an aging population. So as they retire, who's going to pay for their pension? And this is one of the reasons why we bring in immigrants. If we don't bring in immigrants and the population starts to shrink, well, we're going to have a big problem on our hands for all the people who want to retire. So there's that side of the argument. And then there goes to our side of the argument, which is too much, too fast. We don't have the infrastructure to support this. I think they obviously could have executed this a lot better. I do definitely think we need immigrants to be coming to the country. And like you said, we are built, this is a country of immigrants. I mean, I came here, my grandparents are from Scotland, they were immigrants too. But so let's move along. That's a whole other, let's get into the stuff
that's another
here.
complex
that's
issue.
a whole other complex issue. Okay, so this is something very interesting. And it's going to tie into kind of what I just said. Is the financial system rigged? And what I mean by that is, let's take the S&P 500 index. It always goes up over the long run. And the reason I asked this question, and here's my theory, the S&P 500 is tied to the pension funds in the US. If the S&P collapses, there's no money to give to the pensioners. Therefore, the whole system, the Fed, the government, just the system that we have in place, they will not let this go down. They will print as much as they have to make sure that the S&P 500 does not tank over the long run. That's my theory on why the financial system is rigged. I don't think, and maybe I'm wrong, I don't think you can lose in investing in the S&P 500 or any index for that matter. Throw fundamentals out the window because the system itself will not allow for it to happen. That's my theory. What's your opinion on this?
Well, in a way, I like the term rigged. That's a strong word.
Okay.
I suppose you could say managed might be another word. Central bankers do have a responsibility to the nation, right? To keep the economy going, keep the country going. So the long-term interests of the nation, I guess, is reflected in the stock market or the bond market or whatever market, any asset market. So it's definitely in the interests of society to not let that fall apart. So there are measures that are taken, like quantitative easing or tightening, to manage the long-term expectations. Because really, anybody who has a pension, whether it's a government pension or a private pension, is reliant on investments. It's in the interests of society in general and the government to keep things, from imploding, which is another strong word. So, yeah, I mean, manipulated, strong word.
But is it? And again, I'll just play devil's advocate. Is it actually in the interest of society? Because society is getting worse, and to me, I feel like it's in the interest of the shareholders. Not that many people own shares.
Yeah,
it's a smaller and smaller percentage of people that own shares. So I feel like it's in the interest to these people.
Yeah.
And it's like they're all buddies with each other. All the bankers and all the politicians, they're all friends.
Yeah.
And they just won't let it break. Because like the bankers, we can call that the markets are where the fundamentals apply. And then you have the people that actually make the rules of the game who won't let it break either. Because they'll just change the rules of the game to make sure it stays up.
Yeah.
That's why I'm saying maybe rigged isn't the right word, but I just feel like it's you can't lose in it. That's my opinion.
Yeah.
I think over a long run, they just won't let it go down. They'll just print.
Yeah. Yeah, it's a good argument. It's definitely a good argument, and it makes sense. And again, if they let it go down, I guess they're fired, right? It's usually reflected on the administration that's running the country.
Yeah.
At any given point in time, if the economy's doing poorly, basically you're out the next election.
Yeah.
So we all have an interest, even though, like you would say that not everybody owns stocks, but in reality we do. Like if you're getting pension from Ottawa, Canada Pension Plan or Quebec Pension Plan, you do own equities indirectly. So we all have an interest. We all have an interest in making sure that markets do well. But again, if you have a completely manipulated market, now it's socialism or even communism, and that's never worked out well in history. So circling back, I agree, you do have to let free markets price themselves accordingly. You can't save everything, and sometimes there has to be some pain, and that's the way it's always been.
Recessions are not a bad thing. Over the long term, it's not a bad thing, and it's actually a necessary evil to have a recession in an economy.
Well, they're a normal thing. They're a normal occurrence.
Yes.
Wish we had no winter, but we can't fund winter away.
Yeah.
You have to go through the bad times and the good times. But again, they try to smooth it as much as possible, so it's not a violent swing back and forth, and people losing their jobs and getting their jobs, and then companies will invest according to what they think the economy is going to do or how healthy it's going to be. At times when companies say, well, we're not going to spend capital, we're going to take a year away from investing in our business, that obviously has an impact as you go into a recessionary period. And executive committees pull in their horns and say, well, we're going to let some people go, and we're not going to invest, and we're not going to build that new factory. So the construction workers and the steel suppliers and the concrete suppliers and the permits that they buy, those vanish for a short period of time. I mean, it's just the way the economy works. So, central banks certainly don't want to get to a point where a lot of that is happening, because it dominoes. And then it gets to a point where confidence drops, investment drops, unemployment goes up, and that's a recession. But then again, it's part of a necessary circumstance in a free market economy.
So, but I'd like to, and you can say no. I'd like to have your opinion. Do you agree with me, the statement that I just said?
That markets are rigged?
I wouldn't say rigged.
Yeah.
That they will do everything in their power to not let the markets go down. Would you agree with that?
To a degree.
Okay.
Because that's their mandate. That's the central bankers'
But that's not their mandate. Their mandate is to control inflation.
And employment.
And employment,
right?
not the stock market.
No, agreed. But they're all intertwined.
That's the joke that always goes on. Yeah. They have a third mandate now to make sure the stock market doesn't go down.
Yeah, and honestly, this is the way I look at it as a portfolio manager is, when prices go down, people get freaked out kind of, right? Like, oh my God, my portfolio is going down. I look at it as opportunity.
It's on sale.
Absolutely. And I know you're a fan of Warren Buffett to
sure
an
am.
extent, and so am I.
Yeah.
And he had a saying, I may butcher it a little bit, but whether we're talking about socks or stocks, I like to buy when they're on sale. And so if you look at the markets that way, opportunities happen when, things go awry in the market. And we've seen that very recently, right? Volatility spiked over the last few weeks based on what happened in Japan.
Let's get into that.
Okay.
Japanese
Perfect.
carry trade.
Yeah.
That was a great transition there, Bill.
Yeah. I read my notes. Your notes.
Yeah.
So I mean, there's a couple of sayings on Wall Street that apply in this circumstance, I think. And one is that if it sounds too good to be true, it's usually too good
Probably
to be true,
is, yeah.
right? That's one. And so with the Japanese carry trade, which is basically you borrow in Japan, you borrow
'cause the rates
Japanese
are
yen,
low.
the rates are flat, negative even recently, and the Japanese government has been managing their economy that way. Like they've stated, our rates are going to stay low regardless.
It's been like that for 20 years now, 25 years?
Yeah. So you borrow Japanese yen and you invest somewhere else. So you're making that spread between, paying half a point or whatever you're paying in Japan is a lot less.
Is that what, just a little side note, that's arbitrage? Is this like the definition of arbitrage? If it's not,
it's a type of arbitrage, I guess.
Okay.
Strict price arbitrage would mean buying a security in U.S. dollars, selling it in Canadian dollars, and making that spread. The markets have become so efficient with computer.
got it.
That
and stuff.
the spreads in true arbitrage are minimal, almost negligent. But there's machines that do it.
Got it. So back to the Japanese carry
Yeah,
trade. So
so-
basically, you're borrowing yen.
Yeah.
You can because it's a low interest rate.
Yeah.
You can purchase stocks in U.S. for example.
Yeah.
Okay. And then what happened?
Yeah. The Japanese central bank decided to raise rates. And the way markets will look at that is, okay, that's change, right? That's a change in game plan.
Was that a curveball?
You could call it a curveball. You could call it, it was inevitable. At some point, these carry trades, and then you get like a lot of people, a lot of investors like hedge funds and stuff like that, playing the carry trade based on this could go on forever. Kind of like housing market, right? Always goes up, so just own housing. But when something changes in that mix, is it the first shoe to drop, and will rates continue to go up? There's been speculation that that's what the Japanese government or their central bank is going to do, is to start normalizing their rates. So this creates a bit of panic might be a strong word, an awareness that maybe it's time to start unwinding this trade. It's such a massive trade, and it's across asset classes, across economies, across currencies, that when you start unwinding it, often it translates to selling U.S. equities or Australian equities or
So is it
bonds.
basically, just to make sure that I'm understanding, and I've been educating myself on this too, I think I finally understand it. So I borrow in yen because the interest rates are low. I buy a U.S. stock, Apple, for example, and then all of a sudden the cost of my debt outweighs the spread that I was making.
Yeah.
And then I have to sell the stock, right?
Yeah, it's, whatever it is. It could be bonds, it could be currencies,
Okay.
it could be, the New Zealand currency, it could be
But is that
US.
correct though? So as soon as the interest rates goes up, so
Yeah.
me borrowing the yen,
Yeah.
my cost just went up to borrow the yen,
Yes.
which outweighs the money I was making on the stock. Therefore, I need to sell the stock because
Yeah.
I can't, otherwise I can't afford this loan.
Yeah, or it narrows the spread that you were making your money on.
Got it.
And often they'll use leverage, right? Like these
Yes.
trades will be leveraged. So once that signal is received by anybody who's involved in that strategy, it's time to start unwinding. It's your proverbial yelling fire in a crowded theater, and then how fast can I unwind this trade? So, given the belief that this has begun, will have an impact on other markets. So therefore, what do other people do who are not involved in the carry trade? Maybe it's an alarm bell for them to start paring back their investments. So it becomes a bit of another domino effect. There's speculation, and it's complete speculation because nobody really knows that this trade could have been anywhere from $350 billion to $4 trillion in value. You look at either Japanese government lending of security, or currency transactions. A lot of different parties are trying to figure out. But it's very hard to figure out because hedge funds aren't in the habit of saying, well, this is what we're doing with our carry trade and this is what we've invested in, right? You don't, it's like playing poker with two cards showing up. You don't do that stuff. So there's a lot of transparency in carry trades. So again, then you start speculating, where could this fall? Where could the selling commence? Is it going to be U.S. equities? Is it going to be U.S. technology companies? And so that's why we had was it August? I think it was August 5th, the worst day in the Japanese stock market since the crash of '87. And we had 3 of the worst performing days in the S&P 500 were in that 10-day period. So the markets, were jittery for sure. Now, again, the $1 million question: was this just a sell-off, a normal, correction in a bull market, or is there something more to it? Again, we don't know. But it kind of makes sense to me that we needed to have some sort of correction, particularly in the artificial intelligence, tech companies and stuff like that.
Yeah.
Because again, the consensus was you can't go wrong by owning NVIDIA, right? Yeah. It's the greatest company in the world. Just own NVIDIA. It doesn't always work that way when you get everybody on the same side of the ship.
Yeah.
You see, so.
And it could be just some people wanted to take chips off the table. Hey, I
100%.
made 3x on this investment in the past year. I'm going to take some off.
For sure. I mean, that's kind of what I did, to be honest with you, is you perceive risk increasing when, the proverbial bungee cord gets stretched too far in one direction, like markets, like tech stocks going up, 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 up. At some point, just the probabilities of having a price correction increase.
So this wasn't a question I listed, but this just popped into my head. Because to me, what this seems is basically, it's not really much to do with fundamentals. It has to do with capital flows. I know they both impact the price of stocks. In your opinion, what would you say is more impactful on the stock market, fundamentals or capital flows?
I mean, both are impactful, obviously. I think more recently, it's it's flow of capital, it's risk, de-risking.
For those that don't know, capital flows, what I mean by that is just basically if you have a bunch of money sitting on the side and then the capital just dumps into the stock market's going to go up.
Yeah. And stock market is a term, again, I'll sort of go down my own little lane here. People talk about the stock market. The stock market is really a very diverse market in itself. So just to give you an example, rates have begun to fall. They're probably going to continue to fall. That's what the data is indicating that, and the Fed has said we will follow the data. When rates are falling, sectors like utilities or telecommunications companies, real estate will tend to do better because the cost of capital is low. Tech. So, the market is diverse within itself. So when people kind of say, well, how did the market do today? It's kind of like saying, well, how did the NHL do today? Like, did teams win or lose? Like, to me, there's always, markets will fluctuate, sectors will fluctuate, individual companies within those sectors will either benefit or not from rates or inflation or trade, whatever. There's various factors. So, again, to me, there's opportunity in certain sectors if rates are going to go down.
Okay, so this leads to the next point.
Yeah.
We're chugging along here. China. For those that don't know, they're having massive debt issues over there. I heard a crazy stat the other day. And I think Canada, actually not I think, I know Canada is in a similar situation. I know the US is in a similar situation. I think everyone's kind of in a similar situation. And how is this going to play out? No one knows. But China right now, for every dollar of productivity, it takes $13 of debt. That's not sustainable. So what is the risk, in your opinion, of China exporting their deflation? So in other words, for those listening, if the stock market, if the economy stops being as productive, and let's say the GDP numbers drop, no one believes the Chinese GDP numbers. Everyone knows that they're lying. So if they're all of a sudden not running as efficient as they have over the past 20 years, and they have a big impact on the international economy, they can export some of this deflation across the world. Is that a risk right now in markets and the economy? Because that could be another argument. Because there's like this is why it's so interesting. There's an argument to be made on why inflation could go up, and there's also a big argument to be made that inflation could go down. So you have the risk of China exporting deflation. You have AI. Technology is in itself, it's inherently deflationary. So there's so many moving parts. It's so interesting. Do you think it's a risk that China could export this deflation? I'll just go back to the original question because they have a big problem over there.
But in a way, they've been exporting cheap products for decades.
Yeah, which would be, correct me if I'm wrong, that would be deflationary, right?
Well, it should be, because you can buy a picnic table or a deck chair made in China as opposed to buying one made in Arkansas.
Yeah.
So people are buying cheaper goods imported from, manufactured goods imported from China. We all know the story.
Yep.
The more we do that, the more we offshore our own industries, and then you end up in this problem that we're in right now with, with tariffs, like trying to use tariffs to stop this process of buying cheap goods, like artificially cheap goods, right? Like I look at it this way: like, I don't invest in China. I don't trust China. I don't trust their numbers. Mm-hmm. It's a communist country.
And I think a lot of people feel the same way.
Yeah, there's no rule of law.
You could have your capital over there, and then all of a sudden one day they go, nah, we're keeping it.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly. Which, again, getting off topic a little bit, I mean, I believe in investing in North America because it's the best the U.S. is the best capital markets. But that's something we've been experiencing for decades, right? Is buying cheap, artificially cheap Chinese goods. Steel would be a great example. To the detriment of the North American steel industry, you buy cheap steel from another country where it's really not based in economics like ours are. Mm-hmm. That impacts our economy over the long run, because all of a sudden, there could be a scenario where if we don't have access to foreign steel, Chinese steel, cheap steel, and our industry has disappeared because it's not profitable competing against an artificially low-priced system, then we have problems, right?
And this is the argument to be made that inflation could be coming back. So I just gave the arguments for deflation, and this is the arguments for inflation.
Yeah.
The fact that there's international conflict that's obviously occurring right now. It's happening everywhere. Some would say a Cold War going on between China and the United States. And as a matter of national security, a lot of these countries are reshoring all of their manufacturing, they're reshoring energy production, which in turn would lead to inflation. Now, for those that don't understand, why would that lead to inflation? If we're not buying the cheaper Chinese goods from China and we're buying them from here now, or we put tariffs on Chinese products or services, well, that's going to put the cost up, which would be inflationary. So that would be the argument for why there's going to be inflation. And this is the gazillion, as you wrote, $gazillion question. Yeah. Are we going to have inflation? Are we going to have deflation? Nobody knows. And this is another thing. If Trump gets elected, he has a populist political agenda. I think he's going to put his money where his mouth is. I think absolutely he will reshore a lot of the manufacturing. I mean, they already had 4 years of Donald Trump. You saw he speaks his book.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? So we already have a sample size of what he's done, and I think he'll do the same thing again.
Yeah.
So it's going to be, again, it's so interesting to talk about this. We'll see how this is going to play out. Do you want to add anything to that? Or?
Well, I mean, you've got reshoring, and you've got friendshoring.
We got what?
Friendshoring.
Friendshoring?
Yeah. So,
What's that?
So rather than import from, a country that we don't have good relationships, like
Import from an ally?
exactly.
Got it.
So, just to pick an example off the top of my head, maybe you import goods from Vietnam or Mexico than from China or a country that
would that also include Canada exporting natural gas to a country like Germany that we decided not to do? Would it include that?
Yeah, that's we've talked about that before. And if you get me started on that, this will turn into a 4-hour podcast.
Hey, Canada, we'd really like some cheap natural gas because we're importing it from Russia. Can we get it from you instead?
Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Green energy.
We are going to be exporting more in the middle of next year.
Natural gas?
Liquefied natural gas, yeah, from the coast of BC.
Okay.
Yeah, the Coastal Gas Link, it's called. So that is going to open up Asian markets to Canadian natural gas, which is dirt cheap because we only have one market to sell into right now. That's the U.S.
Yeah.
If you can liquefy it and send it to Asian markets where it's priced, 5, 6, 7, 8 times more than it is here, there's going to be more demand for our gas. So that's good for our natural gas industry. And then, with the recently commissioned expansion of the Trans Mountain Pipeline, we've gone from basically 300,000 barrels a day of export capacity there through the Port of Vancouver to 950, I believe it is, 850 or 9. It's tripled.
Okay, I want to we're doing another tangent. I want to get into this because this is actually really important. Can you, people need to understand that, and you made a point, and this actually popped off on TikTok. The word you used was we are logarithmically, as a world, we are increasing energy consumption.
Yeah.
And for those that don't know, AI, so to power these servers, requires a boatload of energy. And AI is not going anywhere. So anyone who wants to regulate it or this is not good for the environment, it doesn't matter what you think, people are going to use AI and it's going to happen. So the energy consumption of the world is going to continue to increase, okay? So for all you tree huggers out there, it doesn't matter what you think, this is what's going to happen. So how should countries position themselves moving forward if they want to, A, be able to compete industrial-wise in order to maintain their standard of living? And what would you say to people, all the tree huggers, that don't understand anything and think that wind and solar can power the entire world, which it can't? And then one last caveat that I'll add on, and this was actually very interesting that I heard on the All In podcast. China right now, they're really going after nuclear energy because you can't scale, for the AI boom, you can't scale coal quick enough. It has to be nuclear. And I can't figure out for the life of me, maybe I'm mistaken and maybe they've changed their stance on this. I cannot figure out for the life of me, for anyone that actually is an environmentalist, if you want to call yourself that, why they don't want to develop nuclear energy and they just want to develop wind and solar. It makes no sense. If you actually care about the environment, you would want to be investing in nuclear. And if we don't invest in nuclear, we're just going to fall further and further behind. Like the market in the US has to deregulate itself so that they can actually build out this nuclear energy. If not, they're going to fall behind in the arms race of AI. This is a fact.
Yeah.
And a lot of people they don't understand this and they just go, oh, oil, gas, bad. Nuclear energy, dangerous. It has to be wind and solar. But you're an idiot.
Yeah.
You can clip that. You're you're an idiot.
Yeah. There's a difference between reality and politics.
Yes.
Right? So, just an example. I'm pragmatic about it all. If we want to maintain our standard of living and we will need more energy, it comes from somewhere. It would be ideal if it came from wind and solar. That would be fantastic, or hydro. We can't get there. We just don't have the technology to make it efficient. And if the sun doesn't shine or the wind doesn't blow, you have gaps in energy supply. So you need something to alleviate those gaps, right? So it's coal, or it's nuclear, or it's natural gas-fired turbines. Natural gas being the less...
It burns twice as clean as coal.
Yeah. So ideally, if you can get off coal and increase natural gas, That's a great transition fuel until some point in the future. Maybe we have some magic. Maybe it's hydrogen. I don't know. But right now we don't have it.
Right now it's not.
So we have a choice to make.
And I just want to, sorry to interrupt again, I just want to hammer down the point for people to understand. Energy consumption around the world is going to continue to increase.
Yeah.
It doesn't matter what you say or your opinion, it's going to go up. It will. This is a fact.
Yeah.
Continue.
Yeah. Hey, listen, third world countries, they want to have a car and an air conditioner as well and a fridge. So just with that, and if you want to, throw cryptocurrencies into the mix, I mean, to mine those is very energy intensive. So,
even a Google search, people don't know this. Like when you go on Google to type something in, like a search on AI uses a lot of electricity.
Yeah.
So does Google.
Yeah.
You type something in, it's like, I forget the exact amount of watts or kilowatts or whatever that it uses. I'm not an expert in that, but that uses energy. We have to get that energy from somewhere.
For sure. Even companies like, the Googles and the Amazons and the Apples of the world are looking for ways to secure their own energy outside the grid.
Yes.
Those people aren't stupid. That's not dumb
Correct.
money. That's smart money.
And that's why Sam Altman, he's a shareholder in a nuclear company because he knows that OpenAI in order to scale this up, they need to get the necessary energy to be able to scale it up. And he's investing in nuclear. They want to start developing nuclear.
If you want clean burning and you want effectively unlimited supply, nuclear makes sense. Right?
Yes.
But there's the history of nightmare scenarios, with reactor meltdowns or an earthquake or whatever that impacts that. So nobody wants a nuclear plant in their neighborhood, right? NIMBY, not in my backyard. On top of that, it takes at least 10 years to build a nuclear facility. The technology is getting better.
But that's in the current regulatory environment.
Yeah, it's still...
Well, it's not taking 10 years to build a nuclear plant in China. I'll tell you that.
China gets things built quickly because you're told to build it, you build it.
I think somewhere, it's always somewhere in the middle.
Yeah.
I'm sure they're skipping steps.
Yeah.
But you take the opposite extreme, like in the West, I mean, it's illegal to build anything these days.
Yeah.
Like the high-speed rail in California. Like it's literally... Elon Musk was saying this, and he's right.
Yeah.
They've spent $15 billion on this high-speed rail.
Yeah.
I think they've built 600 meters of it. It's something crazy, maybe, or 6 kilometers of it. And he goes, it hasn't been built because it's illegal. You can't do anything.
Takes us 5 years to build a bridge.
That's a whole other debate.
Yeah.
So back to the energy thing. If we're going to continue to consume more energy as the world, like...
Yeah.
I know this is kind of a very broad topic, but like, what would you say to people that keep saying no, that keep fighting this, environmentalists?
Yeah.
What do you have to say to them?
Well, it's naivete. It's being misled by government, by politics. You put in agendas to save the world. That's great, right? I mean, you're being progressive because you're doing stuff on the carbon emissions front to save the planet. If you take the opposite side of that argument in the cocktail party, then you're an idiot, right? You're either a denier or you are just, a type of person who doesn't care. You just want to profit from, the hydrocarbon industry or whatever, right? You're the evil person in the room in that argument. But it's not based on reality. Like, people maybe take it for granted that we have energy, like we can flip a switch and you've got a fridge and you've got an air conditioner or even an electric car. These are luxuries that I don't think people are willing to part with.
I would agree.
On top of that, in Canada, like we are approximately 1.5% of the carbon footprint in the world, and we're politically shooting ourselves in the proverbial foot by trying to shut down our oil industry, our oil and gas industry, which again is... People, in my opinion, are naive because they're being misled to believe
that we're making a difference.
Yeah.
And we're not.
We're not. As a matter of fact, you're probably allowing countries that really don't care about their footprint to produce more irresponsible energy, oil and gas, compared to
coal.
Canada where, yeah. So how does this argument gain traction? When do we wake up?
Alberta's woken up.
Yeah.
And it was a shame. I was listening to a podcast with Jordan Peterson and Daniel Smith, the Premier of Alberta, and it's a shame that She had to go to what's the international trade show for energy? Copa? Not Copa. It's the soccer tournament.
Yeah. Sarah?
I forget what it is, but basically Trudeau wouldn't go.
Yeah.
It should be the leader of the country, not the premier of a province.
Yeah.
She had to go to basically say, hey guys, like I know our prime minister doesn't agree with this, but we're open for business. And things like right now, Alberta, it's like the beacon of hope in Canada. Here's a crazy stat. Government has gotten, we're so bloated with the bureaucracy. 90% of all the private sector jobs created over the last 12 months, I believe, it might be 12 or 24 months, 90% are in Alberta. Everything else, whenever you see these jobs reports, the devil's in the details. Oh, wow, look at all the jobs we created.
Yeah.
Most of the time, over 2/3 of it are government jobs.
Yeah.
And government does not add productivity to an economy. It sucks out resources.
Yeah.
Everybody knows that, and it's worse than ever.
And Calgary, I believe right now, is the strongest real estate market in the country.
I've heard it's and I've heard it's not overpriced either.
Yeah. Well, it went through tough times, but it's on the rebound. I mean, it's a matter of, when do we stop buying into this belief that
climate crisis?
Yeah. I mean, the climate's changing. I mean, here's another idea for you. The way I look at it is we're spending an incredible amount of money trying to build out an infrastructure based on renewable energy, which is great on paper, but we won't have enough energy, right?
Yeah.
So how about this? Instead of spending money on a futile exercise in making, trying to get renewables to replace, hydrocarbons or coal-fired or whatever you want to call it, all those other options, let's spend money on ways to get through climate change. Like if water levels are going to rise, shouldn't we be doing something to shore up waterfronts? We're going to need more air conditioning. We've got to find ways to battle forest fires if there's going to be more forest fires. And an interesting book, by the way, I'll go off on my own tangent here a little bit, is every time there's a tropical storm, you would know about this type of stuff being in the insurance industry. Hurricanes hit the coast of Florida, and the damage, like in dollar terms, the damage is way larger than it was 50 years ago.
Yeah, it is.
The reality is...
Adjusted for inflation, too.
Yeah, but 50 years ago, there was a lot of land on the coast of Florida that was barren. Like there was nothing there.
Yeah.
Now it's basically built out,
yeah,
right, from Miami to Maine.
Yeah.
So anytime a hurricane hits, it's going to hit assets. And so there's going to be some damage. So there again, like are storms worse now than they were? I mean, we're led to believe that. And,
that's a good point. I've never thought about that.
If you look at the rainstorm we had last week, Tropical Storm Debbie, that, funny enough, we were in Florida when it started and got out just in time and then circled back and caught us in Montreal.
Been following you.
Yeah. But I mean, I remember specifically 1988 when DeCarry was first flooded. I don't know if you're too young to remember that, but DeCarry Expressway.
In 1988.
Yeah, so DeCarry Expressway was basically filled halfway up.
Okay.
From a similar rainstorm. So yeah, it does happen from time to time.
Yeah.
It's normal. We've had hurricanes as long as we've recorded weather. I think we've had hurricanes that are quite damaging. So I'm not denying that the weather is changing. I think it is. The planet's getting warmer. So what do we do about it? Try and change Mother Nature, change the planet, which is, in my view, almost impossible.
Yeah.
Or do we take measures to combat, like to survive it, like to find ways to help people survive? I mean,
a lot of countries are taking the latter point that you just made, and because they're realizing that's like, okay, these weather events are going to keep happening.
Yeah.
It's more or less outside of our control. How are we going to control India? How are we going to control China with regards to their CO2 emissions?
Yeah.
The answer is you're not.
Yeah.
So we just got to deal with it.
Yeah.
And it just comes back to the same point. It's like, number one, in Canada, if we represent 1.5% of the entire emissions of the world, we don't make a dent of a difference in anything.
Yeah.
We really don't. So it makes sense to, as opposed to just demonizing the energy industry, which, by the way, supports our way of life, supports our welfare state, and a lot of the luxuries that we have as Canadians. Like, guys, just wake up.
Yeah.
Like, we could be selling natural gas, which burns twice as clean as coal, to countries like Germany. And by the way, for those that don't know, when Germany shut down all their nuclear power plants, and when Canada said, no, we don't want to give you natural gas, well, guess what they're burning to get energy? Coal.
Yeah.
So in the aggregate, and we've mentioned this before, in the aggregate, if you actually care about the environment, you're worse off in the current situation because they're burning coal.
Yeah.
So these are things that politicians will never mention. And it's clear, I think some people are waking up, but most people are not waking up. This is fear-mongering. And in the middle of a affordability crisis, they're cramming down our throats this quote-unquote climate crisis.
For political gain.
Well,
because people are afraid, right?
Well, people are seeing through it, and I think it's reflecting
I think they're
in the
starting
polls.
to.
Yes, because people are going like, dude, I can't afford anything, and you're still talking about a climate crisis.
Yeah. I mean, you have to be realistic, right? You have to look at facts. Like, let's establish we're going to need way more energy moving forward around the globe.
Yep.
Right? So where's that energy going to come from? If we don't get it, then our standard of living is going to plummet. If climate's changing, which it appears to be, I don't think, no matter how many trees we plant or how many renewable energy facilities we build, the planet will continue to change. So just another example off the top of my head. If the planet's getting warmer, there's stories every day about a heat wave hits Texas and 20 people died from heat exhaustion in their home or their condo, wherever they live. I think to resolve that problem, what do we have to do? We have to make air conditioners more, climate control accessible to everybody. Otherwise, people are going to die from heat. Mm-hmm. So that requires what? More energy. Mm-hmm. So I think rather than trying to change the planet, I'm just being realistic here.
Yeah.
We need to find ways to alleviate, the impacts of climate change.
And here's the other impact that it's having, and we can move on after this, but it's the fact that energy consumption is not going to go down, it's going to go up. And all of the things that governments are doing right now, all it's doing is just increasing the price of energy. That's all it's doing.
Yeah.
And this is another reason why China is, at this point in time, appearing to be ahead in the arms race for energy and, in turn, AI. Because to win this arms race in AI, you need to have more energy. Because they have more abundant energy, and because they're building out all these nuclear power plants, they're producing energy at half the cost of what the U.S. is. I'm sure way less than what it is in Canada. So people really need to wake up. And if you want to have more affordable energy, you have to get this environmentalist stuff out of your head. And also ask yourself the question, most of these environmentalists fly around the world in a private jet and preach to you that you should be sacrificing the way you live, because if you don't, you're going to die. And then they fly somewhere else on their private jet and they go lecture someone else.
It's easy to preach when, the cost of your personal energy doesn't affect your ability to feed your family.
Yes.
For most Canadians or most people around the world, more expensive energy is less money to spend on other things, and your standard of living plummets. I mean, it's just simple economics and common sense, the whole thing.
Yep.
So I think we have to definitely change the way we look at things. But in my view, politics is the driving force behind promoting this, idea that we can save the planet.
Climate crisis agenda.
Yeah. Hey, again, I reiterate, I'm not saying there's no climate crisis, but money spent trying to change the world, change the planet, and the evolution of climate change is money that we're throwing away, literally throwing it away.
Mm-hmm. So you would agree with the fact that we're better off spending money on ways to make energy more efficient, in the sense that, and what do I mean by that? More efficient, burning cleaner.
Yeah.
because we're not going to consume less energy. We're going to consume more. Therefore, it might as well consume cleaner energy.
Yeah, and even AI, if you want to circle back to AI, that could have an impact as well, right? More efficiency.
Yeah.
Like AI can be used to make everything more efficient across the system.
Yeah.
There's no doubt about that because we do have a very inefficient energy system. I mean,
Yeah.
just from the way buildings are built,
Yeah.
we waste energy in this country.
Yeah.
And Canada is at the top of the heap in terms of proven resources of, most industrial metals, oil and gas. We've got it all here.
Yeah.
We should be benefiting from that, and we're not. And it's ridiculously silly. And again, I'm not going to point fingers at one political party or the other, but politics is the root of all of this fear that the planet's going to burn if we don't change our ways. If we do change our ways, we're going to plummet economically in Canada. Like our standard of living
But we
will
already
go
have.
down. So
There was an article I was listening to this.
for sure.
Someone called Montreal, and they're not wrong. She was just going through as a francophone journalist,
Yeah.
and she was expressing her disappointment with the city these days. And she lives downtown. She goes, "It's like Gotham City.
Yeah.
The crime,
Yeah. Abandoned storefronts, construction.
it's crazy.
Yeah. It's sad.
It is.
And I've heard this from a lot of people. I mean, I've worked in the city for 30 something years.
Yeah.
Every day. The pandemic changed that.
Yeah.
And we were actually forced to not work in the office. Essential services stuff. We had to work from, we had to separate and work from home. And I haven't gone back. My home office is more efficient than my downtown office. Means of communication, whether you're using your phone or chat things or Zoom meetings and Teams meetings, you can access anybody at any time, anywhere in the world, as opposed to having to arrange a lunch or go to a physical meeting at some broker's office downtown.
Plus, it's such a pain in the ass to get downtown. The construction is next level.
Yeah. So
It's dirty.
I'm not polluting more.
Yeah.
I'm polluting less because I'm not in my car going downtown every day because our transportation system is, until we get this new REM working, if it ever works, it's already 3 or 4 years behind.
Yeah, there's a shock.
Listen, I'm not taking a train.
Yeah.
It's just not efficient enough for me. So I choose to work from home. So we all know the story. If I'm working from home, I'm not buying a coffee on my way to the office in the morning. I'm not going out for lunch. I'm not dry cleaning my clothes. And I'm not driving. So I'm not really contributing to the carbon emissions because the miles I put on my car now are 20% of what they used to be.
You're a good Samaritan, Bill.
Yeah, it's just circumstance, right?
Yeah.
So society is evolving. And AI will make things even more efficient, including energy consumption and energy production. Like, fix things that are wrong, become more efficient, charge your car overnight when, the demand for energy is lower. All of these things can be improved with AI. Machines doing this for us, thermostats, everything can be more efficient. Why are we not spending money on finding ways to do things more efficiently, which I think we will through AI, and being commonsensical about preparing for climate change, preparing for ways to mitigate the harm that climate change is bringing our way, like giving people air conditioners, or allowing people to have access to air conditioning. It sounds so simple.
They would be allowed, if the government would just, this is my opinion on this, if the government would stop trying to, I'm speaking about the Canadian government, if they would stop trying to control everything and let the private sector kind of just take its natural course, the price of everything would drop. Because you can't just give everyone air conditioning, especially a bunch of people that can't afford it. You have to make it affordable.
Yeah.
Because if the government giving something, it's essentially all the taxpayers, it's all the citizens paying for it anyways.
Yeah.
It's going to be a hell of a lot less expensive if the private sector is able to supply that. How does the private sector supply anything affordable? You let the free market take charge.
Yeah.
And so if they would just let it go instead of sticking their nose into everything, and this brings us, let's take a caveat. I know you want to get too much into this, but this is just something that I have to say because I'm just so frustrated with the situation that we're in. There's a graph, and even CBC put this up. So that's when you know it's really bad. Taxes today in Canada Let me restart. In 1961, shelter, clothing, food, and taxes in Canada were all roughly the same as a percentage of your disposable income. And it was a lot lower.
Yeah.
Today, taxes in Canada are a higher cost than shelter, clothing, and food combined. And we've talked about this before. And the clip that we had, it was speculation at the time about the capital gains tax.
Yeah.
I thought they weren't going to do it. I said, there's no way they're going to do this. They have a productivity issue. They can't be that stupid. Well, turns out they were. And I know you don't want to get into this too much. But what the hell is going on? Like, when is enough enough? And what's the next step? Does it just break? Do people revolt? I know you don't have the answer, but I'd just like to hear kind of your opinion and what you're thinking, because this is just outrageous. And people who keep arguing, well, it's because these people aren't taxed enough. The taxes are higher than they've ever been. Yeah. And I'm sorry, throwing more money at this issue is not going to fix a damn thing. And my opinion, honestly, I think, and a lot of people are starting to say this too, there's way too many government workers. They're way too inefficient. They need to cut spending somewhere. That's a great place to start. If you're a government worker, no offense, but I mean, even them themselves, they got to know that there's too many government workers in Canada. But I mean, this is absolutely ridiculous. And this is one of the reasons why, or the main reason why, we have an affordability crisis here in Canada. People can't eat. Like, we have a major issue.
Yeah. People are borrowing to eat.
That's
right?
nuts.
And that's unsustainable, obviously.
Like, we have a serious issue here in Canada, and it's going to get worse.
Yeah, it is a serious issue, because capital is flighty. Like, international businesses will just decide, I'm not building that new plant in Canada. I'm not investing in Canada. I'm going to invest in Mexico, or I'm going to invest in Vietnam or Australia or the US or whatever. So one thing I think that politically we fail to grasp is that if Canada becomes an undesirable place for investment, the capital will go somewhere else. And it might even leave Canada to go somewhere else.
Can you give some examples?
So
Do you know any?
So fewer jobs, that would be fewer jobs, obviously, and a reduction in GDP. Unfortunately, I can't think of a precise example right now off the top of my head. It's something that's hard to measure as well, right? If just pick a company, if Apple was considering building a research facility in Ontario, and then they suddenly realize that the tax system has changed, then it's like, well, that's off the table. We're going to build it somewhere else. Or entrepreneurs like private equity, the tech sector. We had a pretty good tech sector building in Ottawa. Toronto, even Montreal has certain areas of tech where we're becoming experts in. But if it becomes unreasonably taxed, they'll just move these. A lot of these companies are brain power, right? They're not building something. It's all intellectual property, and it's very easy to move it. It'll move. And once it moves, it's too late. And once that trend starts and companies say, well, I'm not going to invest in Canada. I'm not opening up an office in Canada. I'm going to open up one in Texas, or I'm going to open up one in Florida or Tennessee or Mexico. Once that consensus is there that Canada is not a good place to invest, it's going to hurt us in the long run. And this is where I think that politicians fail to appreciate the importance of private capital and money to build the country. You can't build a country through government jobs.
No.
Right?
No.
You need to inspire innovation and creativity. And in Canada we have world-class universities, right? We've got everything. We've got the universities.
Well, they've been hijacked by the woke mind virus, so it's like that's kind of on a downfall too. And it's just like the part where I get so frustrated is, you and I know there's going to be a bunch of people that disagree with what we're saying right now, because the country and the world or especially in the West, we're split. But it's like I try to get through to some of these people, and I do sympathize with them a little bit, especially someone who's living paycheck to paycheck, and then they see someone who's super rich, And logically, they're going to go, you know what, you should pay more tax.
Yeah.
But they don't understand how markets and the world actually functions. And it's like, dude, okay, that's fair to say that. And I get where you're coming from because you're living paycheck to paycheck. You can't afford to do anything. You're upset and you have this multi-millionaire cruising around in his Porsche. I get it.
Yeah.
But taxing more doesn't fix it. We're at a point now where the taxes are already too high. And they need to understand that we need to attract the way to prosperity and wealth in a country. I'm not saying there shouldn't be any regulation, but it has to be a mix of both. And as soon as you make it not attractive for other for companies to come here, that is going to diminish your standard of living as well. And I just want people to understand that.
Yeah.
If we have less of a tax, like if you keep taxing and taxing and taxing, you just have fewer and fewer companies.
Yeah.
So in the aggregate, you're actually earning less money.
Yeah. $1 at a time. It just drip, drip, drip. Goes away, and you don't notice it until it's too late.
How do the we'll just say that I'm not saying this is your political leaning, but like how do the Conservatives, because the Conservatives do a really poor job marketing themselves to especially the younger people.
Yeah.
And the Liberals market themselves, they cater more to your feelings. The Conservatives cater more to logic. And right now we're at a point where we need to be catering more to logic as opposed to feelings.
Yeah.
And like how, we're going off topic again, and this, I just want your opinion. How do we get this message across for people who are struggling that more government is not the answer, but that the free market economy is the answer? And because they're always going to jump, well, what are you talking about? Apple made $25 billion last quarter. And they're not wrong. But like, how do we pitch this?
Apple shares.
But they can't afford it. Like,
listen,
how do we pitch this?
Yeah. Well, our society is a society of entitlement now.
Yeah.
Let's face it, right? Everybody's entitled to this, this, that, and we've become that way. Where's the, work hard every day to become successful, build your wealth? A matter of education. Like, do we educate people about how the economy works?
Mm-hmm.
Like, this is what we have to strive for in this country for the betterment of all. And yes, there are billionaires, and sometimes it's obscene, but that's capitalism. Like, even, again, to get off topic a little bit, is there's this movement in the West, to punish the mega successful companies, the Googles, the Apples, the Metas of the world, like constantly under threat from government agencies because of they're too big, they're monopolizing. You know what? They're successful. These are successful companies. Do we really want those successful companies to be based in China or Europe or, no, you want these companies to be here. So are they being punished for being too successful? I mean, there's an argument there. I can't take a deep dive into it because I don't know all the facts, but you just have to look at, constantly governments trying to punish or fine these companies for being too good at what they do effectively, right? They're too good at what they do, so they're becoming huge. It's becoming, the world's will be run by 10 companies. Well, it's because they're successful. Now, do you want to discourage their success? You want to punish them for being successful and then they'll go somewhere else? They'll open up offices somewhere else? I mean, I don't think that's the solution. But definitely overtaxation, it's frustrating because the more you tax, the more you become a socialist country. And that doesn't work when you're trying to draw capital and innovation to a country.
And this is one of so on top of my theory that I gave at the beginning, that inflation and money printing is one of the reasons why there's such a gap between the rich and the poor. It's one of the factors. Yeah. But also too, Canada has clearly, no one's going to debate this, definitely doesn't seem as good as it was 10 years ago. And if you're going to keep scaring away companies, it's just going to continue to get worse. You have to have two things. If you want companies to come here, you have to have a good tax-based system and you have to have law and order. Because if they come here, there's a lot of companies moving out of California and let's say, for example, Walmart sets up and there's a theft every single day. They just go, forget it, I'm going to leave. Yeah. Because the government doesn't crack down on crime.
Yeah, it's a breakdown of society.
Yes.
Of civilized society.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And that's happening right now in the West.
Uh,
It is clear as day.
Yeah.
And for all the people out there, like I always speak to my dad about this, and so he knows that, you know, media outlets like CBC are, you know, he knows they say everything through a lens and they have somewhat of an agenda.
Yeah.
But I try and get my sources from. I don't watch legacy media. No one my age really watches legacy media.
Yeah.
And so I see stuff that he doesn't. And when I start explaining to him some of these things, he's like, what are you talking about? I'm like, have you not seen any of the news going on in the UK? He's like, no, I just heard it's a bunch of alt-right people. It's like, dude, it's so much more than that.
Yeah. It's interesting, your comments on legacy media, because I made a conscious decision last year. I took, I stopped watching CNN, MSNBC. I never watched Fox. I mean, to me, all of these networks have an agenda. They used to report the news.
Yeah, they
right?
don't anymore.
Now there's always an agenda.
Yeah.
And if you watch it enough, you can see clearly through it. I don't follow U.S. politics. I started a little bit recently, to be honest with you. But if I want to know something, I seek it from what I believe to be a reliable, impartial source. Or I look for something that I want to know about, like if something's happened in the world. And the only news app, I've taken CBC and CTV off my phone, all of those
Because they don't report the news.
No, it's an agenda.
Yes.
And so, believe it or not, the only news app I have on my phone is BBC News. And
Even they're like...
I know, but they're not focused on trying to...
defend a political party.
Well, I hate to use the word manipulate, but float an agenda, right? In North America.
In North America.
So
okay.
for
I'll
global
agree with
news,
that. Yeah.
I'll go to the BBC. And I found, particularly with the Trump presidency, whenever, covering that was a nightly game show. I mean, it was just crazy. And we all got absorbed by it. Like, I'm tired of my life being dominated by stuff that's out of my control. That's the conscious decision I made. Clearly, for what I do for a living, I follow business news. But, I use reliable sources, and business news usually doesn't have an agenda. It's just the facts, ma'am, right?
Yeah.
Like, I want the numbers, I want the facts. The other stuff, it became unbearable to me. And even now, if I go back, if something happens and I go back and look at CNN, it's just unbearable. It's a party network.
Yeah.
And I'm not picking one side or the other.
It's an entertainment show.
It is. It's not about informing people. It's not about educating people. It's to be as outrageous and alarmist as you can possibly be to get more eyeballs and ears so you can make more money on your network. I'm convinced that that's what it's all about. We've lost our moral compass when it comes to providing people with impartial news. It almost doesn't exist anymore. So my decision for that type of news, I'm out. I'm happier. I'm happier not focusing on this kind of stuff.
And if you go read a history book, let's just take the Nazis as a perfect example. Yeah. What's the first thing that you do to control a population? You take control of the media.
Yeah. And float a false narrative.
Yes, and people need to wake up. And this is why the good thing that's happening, there is absolutely a rise in long-form media like podcasts, even though the KBD podcast is not as popular as some of the other ones.
It's not generated by AI.
No. But this is why there's a rise of the All In podcast, for a perfect example. They're actually doing their best to report the facts.
Yeah.
Not through the lens of either a Republican or a Democrat, but to actually just report the facts and talk about stuff that the media is failing to talk about.
Yeah.
So, and here's another example. So Kamala Harris right now, and again, I'm trying to be apolitical here. Why has the media not asked her a question it's been 23 days now? She just reads off a teleprompter. And the media machine is just pushing her to basically go and save the country against Donald Trump, this horrible person. But the fact that, put all politics aside, they are not doing their job. Your job, traditionally, as a media outlet, was to keep politicians accountable.
Yeah.
They do not do that anymore. They are a mouthpiece for the politicians. CBC is so obviously a mouthpiece for the liberals. It's obvious. And even I was speaking to a gentleman that I work with. I won't give too much details. He was working with the numbers at Radio Canada, CBC, the French version.
Yeah.
He said whenever the Liberals got elected, the funding went up. They got more money. So it's essentially paying off the media outlet. And what are you going to do? If you have one political party paying you off, you're going to cover the news in a favorable way because they're paying you.
Makes sense.
Yes.
Most people would do that.
And this is what I would actually say, as opposed to if I'm trying to win the election as Pierre Poilievre, instead of trying to attack CBC, go schmooze them and say, oh, I'll give you even more money. I'm not saying it's right.
Yeah. It's not right.
It's not right.
Yeah.
But I mean, the other team's doing it.
But it's the way the world spins.
Yes, and this is like, and just the last, I'm going off on a complete tangent, and then we can kind of, how long we're at now, Shem?
We're at 1:30.
1:30? All right, cool. We got to wrap up soon. But it's like, and then the other issue is the fact that, and this is a fact, for every, I don't know how this has happened, but over the last 30, 40 years, it's all one-sided. Most journalists, it's like a 20-to-1 ratio of left-leaning journalists to right-leaning journalists.
Yeah.
Everyone agrees with that. And this is creating, it's skewing reality, and people are living in an echo chamber. And I'm not saying you should be left, or I'm not saying you should be right. What I'm saying is you should hear both sides of the aisle.
Yeah.
And it's exacerbating all these problems that aren't there.
Yeah. And it's not only legacy media or the media, it's college campuses. Teaching an agenda. If you want to have another 2-hour podcast,
that's
we
like
could go
that's
down
like
that,
that's
right?
a 20-to-1 though. Same thing. Left-leaning professors are, it's 20. I think it's even higher. I think it's like 97% or 95% are left-leaning versus right-leaning professors.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's not healthy in a long run, and it's creating all this divisiveness.
Yeah.
And people now, if you're, it's happening on both sides, but it's not okay just because someone has a difference of opinion to think that they're a bad person.
Yeah. And one of the books I read recently was about a college professor. I wish I could remember her name. Was ostracized by her peers to the point where she had to leave the university.
Because she was Republican?
No, because she was a climate pragmatist. She was saying that,
it's crazy.
You know, instead of like, these are the facts on climate change. Yes, it's changing, but these are the facts as to where. And then it's like, forget about it. Like,
Not allowed.
you know, we're going to lose our funding because of you. So, you know, ostracized by her peers to the point where she had to leave the university. So what are universities teaching our kids? Like an agenda? To the point where if I was in a hiring position, I've thought about this, would I hire a graduate from a university program in political science or whatever?
I won't.
Or would I hire somebody who is street smart? I think street smart.
No brainer.
Yeah. Yeah. What are you learning at
if
school?
I see pronouns on their resume or CV, I throw it in the garbage.
Yeah.
Because, and I'm not saying you shouldn't put your pronouns. It comes with baggage.
Yeah.
And our office here, I pride our office, and I say this all the time, I hire you because of who you are as an individual.
Yeah.
Not because you check off a box of, okay, I have one black guy, one gay person, one Muslim, one.
Yeah.
I don't give a shit. I hire you because you're you.
Merit.
As it should be.
Based on merit.
Yes.
Yeah. You want the best. And
I don't care.
Just because you went to Columbia or Harvard or whatever doesn't mean that you're smart. And there's a danger. And like, if I'm hiring somebody who has been directed to think a certain way because of what they've been taught at university, then to me, the universities are responsible for that. Like, they're doing a huge disservice to their student population. This is just my personal view, but I mean, it's a view that's out there,
I totally
right?
agree, and people need to talk about this because you're educating the youth, and they need to be educated and prepared for the real world, and you're not preparing them for the real world.
Yeah.
And in fact, they're causing problems, and they just go, well, you're just like you're a white male. Your opinion doesn't matter. It's like, what? It's like this.
You have to teach people to be open, right? And open to different ideas.
Yes.
Not as we seem to be doing now. You're either on that team
Yeah.
or our team.
Yeah.
Even politically in the States, right? Especially,
Yeah.
you're either a Democrat or Republican, or you might be an independent, and that's really where the election battleground is going to be, in my view, is the independents. But it's almost like from birth you are a Republican. Like, I would never buy into that. I've voted for many different parties in my lifetime.
Yeah, same.
You know, you tend to go from voting with your heart to voting with your head the older you get.
Yeah.
And I'm older, so it's,
Well, it's like
I
the
vote
same
with my
thing.
head.
Like, I would have voted for, I would say a political party that aligns with my values the most would have been like a Bill Clinton in the 90s and stuff. His political platform was a good one.
Yeah.
Some government intervention here and there, some regulation, but let the free market still do its thing.
Yeah.
But today, I mean, the Democrat Party, they've gone so far to the left. Yeah. They try and control everything, and it's kind of like the same thing here in Canada. You know, we elected a liberal government, and we got a far left party. They are not liberal.
Yeah.
This is not a liberal government.
Bill Clinton wasn't the question. Did he inhale? Remember, he admitted to smoking cannabis on campus when he was a student, and he said, but I didn't inhale. So that became a standing joke, again, before your time, about did he inhale or not. I don't care. I want a competent, responsible CEO to run the country with his staff, being his the ministers or whatever they are. Like, you're running a country. You're not running a country for your own agenda, your own ideas, to promote your own ideas. We're a free society, and the people who run our country should have an allegiance to the country, an allegiance to what's best for the people, and stop trying to change things. Like, just manage the country like you're managing a company. I don't care. I don't care what you are, who you are, what your race is, your gender, your sexual preference. It doesn't matter. I want people who have competence and have a merit-based system where if you're the best, you're the person that should have the job. And bottom line, that's where, in my mind, we should be. We're so far from that and getting further from it that it's going to impact our standard of living in the Western world at one point. We can't sustain what's going on now. I mean, in the US, you have neighbors hating each other because of their political affiliation. That's insane in my mind. As a Canadian, that's crazy. You know, that's crazy. I'm not going to...
Don't kid yourself. I think it's happening here too. If you were to walk around, I've thought about this, like just for fun, walk around the MAGA hat.
Yeah.
I don't kid yourself. I think it's close to just as bad here.
Yeah. Well, in certain circles. I don't think it's as prevalent as it is in the US. I mean, in the US, it's
bad. But go to a MAGA hat on a university campus in Canada.
Yeah.
Go with a MAGA hat to McGill. See what happens.
Yeah. Yeah.
But it's crazy. You can't, like, you will, someone should do that as a social science experiment. I bet you anything. If I had to place a bet, you go with the MAGA hat to McGill in a political science class, they'll kick you out of class. I bet you anything they'll kick you out of the class.
I suppose there's a possibility. Well, you would be ostracized by your peers, I guess.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, unfortunately, I guess wearing a MAGA hat ties you to Trump's extreme, whatever you want to call it. Like when the sad thing about, and I'm not a Donald Trump fan for sure, because I am offended by a lot of the things that he's done in his life that to me are completely immoral, whether they're true or not, right? I mean, I have to assume, just watching him on TV, he probably could have been a really good president if he just played his cards smart. Instead of...
He's entertaining.
Yeah, well, I mean, honestly, when my kids were younger, Sunday night was The Apprentice. I mean, we watched that religiously every Sunday, and it was entertaining.
He's a media genius.
Yeah, but when it comes to running the most powerful, most important nation in the world, you have to have a certain amount of diplomacy, common sense.
I mean, you could argue. I mean, he's the first president in a long time to not get in any wars. You could say that.
Civil war? A cold civil war.
Well, he's the guy to bring up an issue like the border.
Be a CEO. Again, back to, I don't want to hear about, this and that and, pointing fingers at one segment of society over the other.
He's definitely a bully.
Disrupting, blatant lying. You can't deny that he just fabricates stuff.
Yeah, he does.
Like if he just could have been a respectable CEO, he would have been reelected in my view. but you can't be that disruptive, and he did it, well, in my belief, for his own personal gain at the end of the day, right?
My opinion on Trump is, I'm going to offer an opinion on the situation. I think that he is going after the deep state, and they're going to fight him tooth and nail because he wants to change so much. So, and anyways, that this is a podcast for another time, but I'll just say that in short. I think he's going after the deep state. He's not part of the establishment Republicans. So, he just brought in his vice presidential candidate, J.D. Vance, who is not a legacy Republican. And I think it's a new era for Republicans. And I think the reason why they're gaining traction is because of his populist agenda, in the sense that, J.D. Vance said it really well. He goes, I go to Iraq, I come back, all the manufacturing's hollowed out, everyone's addicted to fentanyl. I'm going to bring your jobs back. Now, whether they will or won't remains to be seen. I think he's going to try, but I think they're disrupting the machine, and I think that's the bigger reason why there's such a violent reaction against Trump, because I think he's attacking the actual system itself and all the people who have been there for far too long. So does he have character flaws? Absolutely. Is he a person I'd want to do business with? I'd probably say no. Yeah. But there's definitely something deeper there that they don't like. Yeah. And I think that's why there's such a big reaction to him. I have never seen, and I'm not as old as you, but no one has ever seen as big of a reaction, like, oh my God, like such hatred from both sides. Yeah.
But they inspire that. Like, it's their methods. In my view, again, back to be a responsible CEO. You don't even have, I don't want to hear about you in the news. Run the damn country, right? Don't try to put yourself in a position where you're dictating to the population and trying to make yourself more popular and planning for the next election. Just be a CEO.
But any politician does that. Any politician does that.
Unfortunately, that's what politics is. Yeah. It's a lot of BS and finger pointing and blaming. Yeah. And like promises, false promises that you possibly can't keep.
And decisions are made. That is, look, there's pros and cons to both sides. Yeah. But when you have an election every 4 years, or pretty much the same thing in Canada, the reality is, when you're getting closer to an election, your decisions are going to be based on more of a short-term thinking as opposed to a long-term. That's just the reality. Yeah.
And for yourself, right? If you're at the lower end of the economic spectrum, then, free this and free that, and, government programs for this and that appeal to you, and, to heck with the rich, tax the rich, that appeals to you. And this is where, again, we have to be more educated as a society to know how our economic system works. And knowing that things like too much taxes is only going to impact all of our standard of living down the road, because it's a competitive world. It's more competitive now than ever. You can move a company, not at the flick of a switch, but basically it's happening, right? Musk moved everything to Texas, or he's moving everything to Texas because California is out of control.
They regulated him to death.
Yeah. 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 So I get that. It makes sense. I would probably do the same. I would say I'm more inclined to leave this province than at any other time in my life, even during, the referendums and the threat of sovereignty. I just don't like the way this place is being run. But then where do I go? Is it the same thing? Is the grass any greener on the other side? I don't know. So I'll circle back to, I'm much happier ignoring the news on a day-to-day basis, and look for news.
And living in the West Island.
Living in the West Island. It's not so bad, right?
We got a good life in the West Island.
Yeah, we do.
We got a good life. Bill, I think that's a really good place to wrap it up.
Yeah.
I thank you for coming on. For those of you that want to check it out, Paolo, I'll let you plug yourself.
Well, sure. I mean, what I do for a living is I manage an alternative equity fund for clients, which is actively managed based on my 25-year career as a equities trader in Canada. So that's what I do for a living, and I manage that through Palos.
Ladies and gentlemen, the KBD podcast. Thanks for joining.
Thanks, Curtis.
Thanks, Bill.